You're tuned into the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This is the show that's all about the pros behind the pros. And the pro we have this week is Cole Gardner. He's a sports science coordinator for the Houston Texans. We're going to learn all about his role with this football team that's doing great this season. And before we get started, remember SatantCollege.com. It's where you can go for a Master's of Science in Performance Coaching, as well as a track in Applied Sports Biomechanics and Movement Science. They've got a track in Sports Injuries and Return to Performance Management, as well as Applied Sport and Exercise Psychology. SatantCollege.com, enter RS10, and that will give you 10% off your tuition today. If you want continuing education, perhaps you're an athletic trainer, physical therapist, chiropractor, or strength coach, consider going to my website, RockySnyder.com. We've got ongoing online and in-person workshops that cover a whole gamut of information for the fitness and health and medical professional. That's, again, RockySnyder.com. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, SNYDER, and give us a little bit of a review every now and then. Tell your friends about it, hit that subscribe button, and enjoy this conversation. Right on, Cole. I can't thank you enough for coming on the Zealous Podcast. We've had some sports scientists in the past. Just a few come to mind right now within the NFL. Patrick Ward up with the Seahawks is definitely has become a friend and colleague over the years now, and it's just such an emerging field that it's great to speak with sports science coordinators like yourself. So first of all, welcome to Zealous.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and talk a little bit about what we do, hopefully here in Houston, but then also just sports science and performance as a whole.
Yeah, you guys are, you're not looking too shabby this season. It's really nice to see the Texans kind of shining bright. And so before we get underway with the team itself, though, you grew up in the Florida area, went to Florida State for your undergrad and graduate. Tell me your studies. What did you do for your undergrad, and what did you get your master's in?
Yeah, for sure. So, like you said, Florida State for both of them have a little bit of a unique kind of pathway or different. So I did undergraduate degrees in information systems and marketing. So completely business side, right? Not sports, not performance, not entertainment, anything like that. And long story short, you get the job out of college, kind of do it for 4 or 5 months, and just knew that it was not for me. And so wanted to get into sport, had always been, just interested in it like most people are. It's entertainment, it's fun, it's challenging, right? And so decided that sports science would kind of be this emerging field that I heard about and looked at the different, programs that were offered across the country. Obviously, Florida State happened to offer one, you know, made some connections through the school, got into the program and started from there. But it was definitely a unique way to come up, but it kind of was able to tie the undergraduate and the graduate degree together as you get into kind of the data storage, health, that kind of area. So it's been a good pair so far.
Right on. What sports did you grow up playing?
So played football super young, like elementary school, and that kind of pretty much ended there. Played basketball in high school, but just recreational stuff, but nothing past that. In college, kind of found a love for like recreational running for myself, and so did nothing competitive or anything like that, but just enjoy getting out, running on different trails and visiting different towns and kind of doing that as you can, through these days. But
Right on. And so, okay, the moment that you were inspired by sports science, what was there an actual event that you became aware of this as being a viable path? What happened there?
yeah, so I think it was kind of first introduced through like how like you watch the games on TV and you see the speeds guys run, or you see the different shows around sports science and training. I kind of heard about it there. Was interested in getting into sports as a whole, and kind of started in like the S&C world almost. So started as like an S&C intern, learning the kind of groundwork that way, and then I was started to hear about the sports science field and wanted to get my foot in the door somewhere. And so kind of searching internships online and just trying to find a place where I could land. And eventually we'll probably talk about it, but that's how I got out to Salt Lake City in Utah. with the rugby team, and started to learn kind of some foundational sports science and strength and conditioning principles that way.
Oh, that's interesting because I was gonna say I thought you maybe grew up with rugby because your LinkedIn profile photo, not that it's distorted in any way, but it looks like you've got that physique, the neck and shoulders of a rugby player. So I'm thinking, yeah, all right. But
I wish.
honestly, it's just so. With Florida State, you got done there, and then you got a gig with Penn State,
Mhm.
and you started teaching. You mentioned before we began to hit the record button that you did a virtual class. What was that all about?
Yeah, so when I got to Penn State, I worked under Josh Nelson and Mark Lewis, and Mark's here as a director now in Houston, and so that's kind of my tie to Houston, as you can see in the forefront. But at Penn State, we had a really interesting way to basically connect all of the different teams there, right? So you have a vast Olympic side, and so you have 31 different sports up there. And so basically learning through Josh Nelson and Mark about this kind of framework they had built out in terms of more so on the data side, right? Like basically a way to warehouse, store, and publish data. And so in an ecosystem, if you will, right? And so I learned that from them, and that was kind of the topic that I ended up sharing with graduate students at Florida State, was kind of educating on, with maybe low cost, low entry, how can you build somewhat of a athlete management system inside of Microsoft applications in themselves. With a lot of strength coaches or sports scientists, maybe starting with low budgets, or not able to necessarily buy entire AMS systems. This was a way to kind of teach a framework, a way to store data, analyze data, publish data, all those things. And so I educated that on them. I educated them on that, and I had learned it from Josh and Mark up at Penn State.
Very cool. Okay, and then is that how things kind of happened with you and the Texans, having that connection in Houston and so on? How did that come about?
Yeah, so Mark had gotten the director job down here earlier in the year, and Mark and I had known each other prior to Penn State. The network kind of runs right. That's what drives jobs and movement and stuff like that. But Mark had gotten the job down here with Houston, and then they were able to open up a role, and I applied for it and went through the process there. And amongst many competitive applicants, I was ended up getting selected for it last July. And that's when I moved down here to Houston and started working under Mark in sports science. And we've since then had another team member added as well in the apprentice level. And he's been fantastic this season, has opened up the uh, opportunities for us as a group, right? We've got 3 full-time sports scientists now with this team. So we try to, capture a lot of data and have a lot of different athlete touch points as much as we can.
Yeah, I can only imagine the fields of data that you have to kind of meander through or explore through, especially when you consider the different positions, different roles, and all aspects of American football. So, I mean, how do you narrow your focus across this vast field? Have you found in the relatively short time that you've been doing this, the what are the big buckets that you're looking for? What are the data that you're trying to mine that have the highest value for you, if you can share that?
Yeah, I think on, like, just speaking globally, I think, right, you're trying to monitor fatigue, right? You're trying to monitor how athletes respond to the stimulus, whether it's off-season training, whether it's in-season training, whatever it is, whether it's weight room training or on field. You're trying to get almost like a touch point, if you will, right, across the
Hmm.
week. And through different technologies and modalities, everybody's got their own way in which they collect that. But I think that's a massive bucket, is right, just getting some sort of objective fatigue monitoring piece, and in helping athletes understand, how what they're doing outside of the weight room, or maybe outside of the meeting room, out on the field or out in the weight room, um, what that's doing to their body and how they're responding. And so, aside from the data collection in itself, I think one of the big things we try to do here is, conversations and driving education, right? Because if we can build those relationships and help, get our athletes to take advantage of their data, right, and understand the process that they're going through and how they're responding through different, monitoring metrics. I think that's what really drives this positive feedback loop that we're trying to build with our athletes and educate them on that.
Yeah, it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like fatigue has been the bellwether, the main barometer, if you will, for most everybody these days. It used to
Yeah.
be something we're striving for in the weight room is temporary muscle fatigue, but fatigue as a player, whether it's mental, physical, in the weight room, on the field, looking at GPS, looking at counter jump movements, looking at sprint speed and
hmm
repeating. Uh, is it is that pretty accurate? Is that what everyone's kind of homing in on as the compass point that they're looking at?
Yeah, I think you push and you pull depending on the phase, right? And so, like, I think in season fatigue monitoring is massive, right? Like, football is a football schedule, right? And so, like, whatever, percent allocation you want to put into that bucket, I think that more gets poured there during the season. And then when we get to the off season, I think you start to ask questions like, okay, we understand what we're going to utilize from a data collection and metric standpoint in season. Now, how can we drive adaptations to, further push these athletes down the continuum during the off season? And like, I think that fatigue monitoring in season, but then when you want to start looking at like performance metrics, right? That, maybe it's position group relevant or individual athletes, however you decide to bucket that out. But just understanding that we're trying to look at different metrics per phase and different metrics per focus depending on like what stimuli is being applied to the athlete.
Is there a time where you're looking to a more critical degree within the season? Is it mid-season, late, or postseason? When do you surmise that it is the most critical time to really monitor fatigue? I know obviously it's across the whole spectrum, but is there a time that history is showing based on last season and seasons before, all the data you collect that you've had that point in one area or one time of the season?
Yeah, I think it depends on the population and the team, right? But like you said, as you collect in-house data and kind of almost do in-house research, you understand maybe where your weak points are, whether that's a specific phase of the year, whether it's a specific muscle location, right? Like, I think that our efforts and modalities of monitoring fatigue are able to hopefully be adjusted to where we see need, right? Like, just because counter movement jump is popular, if we find that, it might not be applicable for a certain population depending on the sport, based off whatever you want to base it off of, or, thinking that if we have an X injury location that was super vulnerable last year, how can we maybe attack that location and maybe monitor a little bit more there? Just conceptually thinking, right? Like, if you have holes in a system, you're trying to plug them, right? And so, if what to your point, whether it's phases or injury site specific locations, however it is, I think that your efforts can be adapted around that.
All right. Now each team is going to be a little different in their selection of information when it comes to sports science. Some teams may put more import in different arenas or elements compared to others. When it comes to your team, and without giving away trade secrets, um, do you feel like you have a unique recipe compared to potentially other teams, or is it now rather homogenous across the entire NFL? You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. I think that I would go with the latter and say that most of us are homogenous, right? I think, and this kind of goes back to a point I made earlier about like athlete education and relationships. I think that that is really where you make a difference, because at the end of the day, we're all a part of billion-dollar organizations, right? The resources are plentiful, and we're grateful to be in these positions. but I think that it's the ability to relate with athletes. It's the ability to, expand on relationships. And I think honestly, after all of the data collection and all that stuff, what we're really trying to do is drive intervention, right? And like create positive change. So I think that is honestly where certain, and I can't speak for teams succeeding or failing, but in theory, I would hypothesize that like that is where you can move the needle more. We can all collect the data, but it's about, being actionable with it and driving, objective change that is pushing us to where we believe is closer to winning more football games.
Got it. Okay. Let's just imagine for a moment, Cole, that you are selected as one of the prime presenters at the National Conference for Sports Scientists. What are you going to talk about? What is the topic that you feel strongly about that you can expand upon and share your insight?
Yeah, that's a great question. That would be a lucky world, right? If that was the opportunity.
Oh, it'll
But
happen. Don't worry, it's going to happen. So until that moment does, yeah, to
right, planning.
prepare.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Uh, I I think that I'd probably attempt to go more global picture, like not necessarily be super granular around sports science in itself, but more of the high performance kind of, how do departments in a performance group work well together and thus push the needle to where we're trying to go. And so I think that sports science has a unique position because like if it has an on button and it collects data, like it's seen as sports science sometimes, right? So I think that allows us to kind of have our hand in all different departments of performance or athlete well-being, and then kind of the the interaction between all of those departments would be something that I would try to explain on, I think, and how data is collected, analyzed, and then utilized across whether you're, your nutrition and wellness, or if you're strength and conditioning or your athletic training, how do all these groups work together, powered by the collection of data and, drive objective changes.
Got it. Okay. In regards to thinking about Moneyball, the story of the Oakland A's and how things have changed in Major League Baseball by looking at players in regards to on-base percentage. Uh, it wasn't something that they were continually looking for at that time. There was I won't say archaic or traditional way of valuing and determining the value or worth of a player. Has anything kind of piqued your interest within the NFL and how players are viewed or performances looked at? Is there an outlier that you're kind of going, well, that's interesting? Or was there something that you thought somewhat irrelevant actually has more potency than you first realized?
That's a great question. I do want to go down the rabbit of like, are we
Go.
talking like physical attributes around maybe athletes in general?
Yeah, the more we can geek out, the better. You want to go down a rabbit hole, I'm going to follow you all the way down.
Okay. Love it. I think that one of the things that might be maybe not overlooked or underlooked. I don't want to, make, generalizations like that, but I think that we look at the top end of spectrums, right? Like top speed or, massive outputs. But I think that what really makes athletes different is the ability to move in small spaces and make quick reaction times, whether it's soccer or whether it's football. And this is just like a hypothetical. I don't have data that drives this decision or this feeling, but I think that focusing on in specific like moderate deceleration and acceleration in high capacities is what's going to build kind of a robust and resilient athlete, in contrary to maybe focusing on top end performance metrics.
I love that. Honestly, I'm stoked that you even said that because now we're getting into like motor neurology and actually neurology or brain science. Because I mean, I agree. I don't think we're looking at the ability of what separates players' reaction time, coordination, multi-directional movements, the control that needs to be had. I I know there's measurements out there. I know there's some assessment tools with it, but I think that that is something that is underserved when it comes to understanding an individual player,
Yeah.
as well as drive, like the intangibles, like what
Yep.
separates a player from being undervalued and turning into a champion. Like those are the
Right.
things that kind of make me kind of scratch my head and go, okay, how can you measure that? What's a way of determining that? Do
Yeah.
you?
No, I think that's a great question. That's a great point and a leading topic, right? It's the intangibles. It's the, like you said, like athlete intent, from a small scale, from a sports science lens, right? It's the intent in the testing and monitoring we do with our guys, or from a large scale, it's the intent in positional meetings and stuff like that. It's the uh, it's the athlete's ability to go the extra mile, right? Like I think that we have such gifted athletes that we have the opportunity to work with. What separates them is, in my opinion, I feel like very small nuances that are compounded over time. It's not necessarily a magical recipe, right? Like it's small inputs day after day after day, and it's kind of cliche to say, but I think that's really what does it.
No, I think the combines are a great way of having some kind of thermometer measuring gauge, but I think there's an element that uh, maybe it's not just being talked about, or maybe I'm just so ignorant that I don't know it. Maybe it exists and I'm not aware of, but there seems to be like an opportunity for the sports scientists to actually look at potential recruits, potential draft picks, and putting together whether it's a subjective kind of assessment, or there's actually objective parameters that are going to discern the potential of an athlete. Because if you think about it, like how many Heisman Trophy winners actually go on to do some amazing things with the teams they land in? And I can only think of a few to be off the top of my head. I can
Yeah.
think of more Heisman Trophy winners that were the number one draft pick. They were up there, and then they just didn't measure up to where everyone thought they were going to be. But meanwhile, you've got a guy in the second round or third round or beyond that was the dark horse that no one really expected. And maybe it's that low expectation put on them that gives them the drive. I just wonder if there's a space for sports science to kind of fine tune the aperture in a way so that you can find those dark horses. Do you guys have, like, not to give away any trade secrets here, but is that something you guys are kind of considering or looking toward, or you have enough on your plate that that isn't something you need about another half dozen sports scientists before that actually becomes a reality?
Yeah, I totally I see where you're going, and I think that you're kind of getting into the world of like talent acquisition, right? And like the you're trying to take public data or maybe data collected at draft combines and stuff like that, and drive decision making off of that.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely opportunity there. And it goes into the idea of like if we can, use five tests or whatever you want to call them to, somewhat put objective numbers around an athlete and almost like predict potential, if you will. You get into a
Yeah.
dangerous world, I think, with trying to predict things like that. But I think it's definitely a concept out there that I've heard others discuss, and there's definitely steam behind it.
So what I'm hearing you saying also is that you've got sports scientists, statisticians for talent acquisition, scouting, and so on, and you've got your world of sports science in regards to performance, but there isn't a bridge between you necessarily. Is that is that accurate, or is there communication between the two of you? Or are you guys just separate silos in your own fields, and never the twain have met?
Yeah, so there is a bridge. We collaborate often, and It's, I think, unique here to the Texans, but whether you're in data analytics upstairs and in the business side or the football performance side, or you're in athletic training on the rehab and physiology side, there's collaboration across everybody.
Very
And
cool.
specifically, we work with them, and they help us in terms of the warehousing and storage of data and all that world, right? Of making sure that what we're collecting, on the ground or boots on the ground resources is stored and managed and maintained properly too.
Right on. Oh, that's interesting. I don't think I've ever had a conversation quite like this that delves into that field. So that's really insightful for me, and I appreciate it. So you've got your own balance sheet, your professional balance sheet, shall we say? You've got your assets and your liabilities. What's under each category for Cole Gardner?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say, and one thing I'm learning this year specifically, but on the asset side to start, is learning how to effectively communicate information across. Again, I keep going back to across departments, but that's just how we operate here, right? We're lucky to have as many staff members on as we do have here, and that it drives the need for communication of information. And so I think that that's something that I've improved at and always going to have to continue to work at, but something that I think has been pushed further. um, Liabilities, I think, just working in this field, in football and sport as it is, we're always going to face the concept of separating work and life, and the continuous pursuing of like getting better, whether it's a new research article or it's a new study that came out, or a new modality of training or testing. In the decision to dive down that rabbit hole or to have some work-life balance, I think is always going to be a liability. So it's something that I'm learning as I get into this field more. But that was probably my first one of my liabilities.
Right on. All right. You mentioned research. With the work that you do and all the data points you're collecting and the summations you create based on this information, are you doing any research yourself with the information that you're attaining?
So I wouldn't call it like published research, but kind of goes back to the in-house research, right, if you will. We do a lot with trying to understand our specific population more, whether you want to say professional football players or Houston Texans football players, right? I think this kind of goes back to a previous point we talked about, but that's what makes sports scientists or strength and conditioning coaches or just performance, practitioners, I think, different, is their ability to relate to their specific population. And so we do have some, try to learn more about where we may be weak or strong, and either push more or pull back in a certain area if we think it's going to be better for us in the future seasons to come.
Sweet. Okay. In general, we learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. So when it
Mhm.
comes to wins and losses one week to the next, would you say that is the same, or do you get insight within your field, uh, depending upon the outcome of the game? Like, do you learn more from a loss than you do from a win? Or does that not necessarily pertain to your department so much as the coaching or players, the staff there?
Yeah, I think that, just being part of an organization like this, we're all trying to win games, right? Like that's the bottom
Sure.
line, is win football games, no doubt. But I think that as we're an extension of the strength staff. We are in the weight room, we're on the floor, post game day +1 or game day +2 whenever our lifts start. And so I think we almost have a duty as a group of performance practitioners to, regardless win loss, it's the same mentality the next week, right? Like we have to be the constant in the continuous world of uncontrollables. And so whether it's we won by 40 and we just got home off the team just got back, or we might have dropped a game that we thought we were going to win. Either way, the progressions in the next week have to start. And so we kind of pride ourselves as a performance group, and our head strength coach here does a fantastic job of leading us from the front in terms of, mentality, right? Like we can't necessarily react to the wins and losses as much as we want to love the wins, right? But I think just trying to stay steady and, again, be that kind of, set the standard for the week to come.
What gets you out of bed in the morning?
I think it's a mixture of a few things, right? It's the opportunity and the ability to get to work with athletes of this caliber every day is I'm grateful for it. And I think that they're sharing their talents with us, right? And we're able to be a part of their story and kind of help them do what they do best and what they excel at. And being a small piece of that puzzle is something that's extremely fulfilling for me. And we take pride in that as a group. So I think that's probably the first one that gets me out.
All right. So thinking about the season schedule, now we're up to 18 weeks. It used to be 16. Sure, you've got a bye week in the middle of the season, but you've also got a Thursday night game. You've got a game over in Germany or
Mm.
Wembley Stadium, or it's not the same as it was only a few years ago. How does that mess with you? Or how does that create uh interest? Or what does that do to you and the staff of sports scientists for the Texans? Like, I, how do you how does that affect your workday when you've got overseas games or a Thursday night game, or for that matter, even a Monday night game?
Yeah, I think we have to be adaptive, right? Like we're trying to make sure that the boxes get checked throughout the week, and that we, if we need to collect data or we need to send out reports or whatever it is, we have to be adaptable to the game schedule, and that's during the season. I think when it comes from an off season perspective, there's a lot of planning and preparation that happens from people above me at the director level, and the people here that have a lot of coach communication and the being ahead of the game, right? Like we know what the schedule is going to be like, so we can hope to adjust, whether it's the strength and conditioning program or whether it's the practice planning on field, that conversations I'm personally not necessarily a part of but are happening in organizations. I think just trying to get ahead of it and make sure that we have all of our plans set out as we enter into those abnormal weeks.
Sure. Do you have to do you find yourself having to explain your role to friends and family? Like when you tell them, I'm sports science coordinator with the Texans, it's a little bit different than saying, maybe I'm a strength conditioning coach, or a physical therapist or assistant coach or
Yeah.
something. People pretty much understand what's entailed there. But when it comes to sports science, do you find yourself going, oh, here we go again? I've got to explain sports science 101 to these people.
Well, first and foremost, grateful and happy that I do get to explain the position, that there is one, right? But
Good man.
right, definitely check that box. But I think that it's funny because we work in a field where, depending on who you talk to from each organization, the job is vastly different. Like I said earlier, we're fortunate to have three sports scientists on staff here, and so that allows us to have job scopes that are very different than if you talk to someone who is the only sports scientist as a part of a football team. So I think that we have very different job scopes, but there is definitely this kind of question around, like, what exactly do you do? And I think that even comes from not necessarily people outside of performance, but even inside football teams or baseball teams or wherever the position falls, there's always a unique kind of twist, I feel like, on it. And, for better or for worse, allows interpretation and nuance into our roles. And I think that's something that I honestly enjoy, but definitely an explanation.
Sure. Okay, cool. So amongst the three of you guys, or people, there could be men and women. I don't want to assume. Amongst the three scientists, do you divide and conquer? Is there a specialization? There's this is what I'm looking at, and they're looking at something else, and then we're going to kind of collaborate, and then we're going to have weekly meetings with other stakeholders and so on. How does it work for you?
Yeah, so we have three of us. Mark Lewis is our director of sports science. and he basically oversees, right, the operation and manages, where we kind of delegate our times. Obviously, I'm the sports science coordinator, and then we have Tyler Wang, who joined us earlier this year. And Tyler has a phenomenal background when it comes to data uh, visualization, collection, when it comes to programming languages and stuff like that. He's a wizard there, and so he owns a lot of that space when it comes to the actual building of dashboards, right? How do we distribute information? How do we make sure it's stored appropriately? All of those things, he's been owning that space. And Mark, being the director, is uh, you know doing things like external load monitoring, where it's looking at testing and training for our healthy population um, during the practice weeks and stuff like that. And just making sure that as a department we're headed in the right direction, because I think that that can always get off the rails as you go through a season like this. And then lastly, I kind of is somewhat of a new, I don't want to call it a specialization, but I'll say a focus. This year have spent majority of my time with the return to football team and in the rehab space. And so it's been a unique opportunity for me to learn from some coaches who are amazing at what they do, and also get exposed to a completely new side of performance in sports medicine. So it's been a new kind of role, if you will, or focus. But again, I think it goes back to the fact that we have three of us on staff, and it allows me the opportunity to focus, on a select group of athletes that are going through rehab processes for whatever reason.
Yeah, give me a little bit more insight on that if you don't mind. Like the return to play, the return to performance, that whole rehab spectrum. Like
Yeah,
where does sports science come into play there? What are the big things that you're mining from that process?
yeah. So we have, obviously we always have injuries, right? There's always going to be injuries in this sport.
Everyone's injured, yes.
And if they're not in rehab, it's because it's not bad enough yet, right? or however
Well
it
said.
works. But no, I think that, so for me specifically, we utilize a lot of technology, whether it's force plates in the weight room. We do a boatload of training on the field, almost every field session utilizing 1080 machines. And
Mhm.
so, with that comes data collection, data storage in real-time feedback loops with coaches and athletes alike. And honestly, I would say at a high level, my focus, being in that space, is we're going to collect the information. We know that's going to happen, right? We have those parameters, but are there ways that we can collect and relay information effectively in real time to help drive decision making? And obviously it's not making decision making, we're not making decisions based off of a single isolated test or something like that, but it's, can we add context that is helpful in session, rather than waiting until post rehab sessions. So yeah.
Yeah, I know Sue Falzoni was there last season, and she
Hmm.
helped really set up a big part of that
Hmm.
return to performance spectrum. And I don't know if she's just got the Midas touch because this she where did she go? She went to the LA Dodgers, and then they go and win the World Series. So who knows? Maybe she left some magic pixie dust for you guys, and you'll be making it into February. But um, I just find it as an interesting area of conversation and how sports science permeates everywhere. It's
Yeah.
just it's such a broad topic, a broad subject or title, and from there, it's almost like the number of raindrops that fall from the sky, the different things that you can measure and find. So, getting away from the rehab spectrum for a second, and let's go positionally, if you don't mind, for sports science. This is going to be almost like rapid fire questions. So just think on your feet as I shout out a position. What element of sports science are you that really pertains to that? Like uh, place kicker or punter? Where does sports science come to
RSI.
play?
So
RSI.
yeah, yeah, I think it's being fresh and ready to perform. those players are they're one of one in their craft, right? They're specialists, and that they're term specialists as a reason because they are so special in their craft, right? So I think from our perspective, the best thing we can do is not necessarily anything. I think it's support them in what they excel at, and make sure that they're ready to go on game day.
Okay, offensive lineman.
Brute force. So can you keep maximal force exertion throughout all year long? Can you keep that ability there and allow them to keep using it on Sunday?
The secondaries.
Speed, speed. Got to be able to react. Got to be fast. And I think that you could use the RSI answer for everybody, right? Because they're all talented. They need to be fresh. But in specifically, it's speed. I think.
Awesome. Long snapper.
Back to specialists. I think it's a skill, and it's a extremely specialized skill, right? So I think that if they're fresh and available, that's the best they can be.
Running backs.
Running back is ability to accelerate, right? You've got to be able to hit on the gas, and not necessarily in season, but I think that's an off season attribute that you train, but in season making sure that it's maintained and continue to be exposed to.
Wide receivers.
Wide receivers, deceleration, right? Routes, it's all deceleration. Obviously, you have longer routes that maybe don't necessarily encompass a deceleration, but most of them still encompass some sort of change of direction. I think what they can do inside 200 milliseconds is what separates them.
Linebackers.
Power. It's got it. You've got to maintain. I don't want to say maintain weight, but they're stronger builds of athletes, but they also have to be able to, hit holes and make decisions fast.
Tight ends.
Tight ends, IQ. I think that tight ends are so versatile in how the offense runs that, I don't even, I guess it's not really sports science, but it's more so just football as a whole. They're just continue, whether they're in for run blocking or they're running routes. I think that they just have to be adaptable, in their IQ drives that.
Wow, that was unexpected. Okay, lastly, quarterback.
Availability. They got to be available, and I think that they kind of fall into the specialist bucket, one of one or one of two, right? Like depending on what team you're talking about, but making sure that keep the main thing, and that's something that is echoed around here often. And making sure that whether it's a quarterback, a punter, a specialist, those guys who have very specialized talents, if we just need to keep them available and healthy on the field.
Sweet. Nice job. Wow, you would be good at speed dating, I think. Uh, let's. What are some of the biggest challenges that you face in your role?
Yeah, that's a great question. Challenges, I guess from a personal standpoint, in the position I'm in now, it is we collect so much information, right? It's not, I don't want to say weeding out information that doesn't matter, but it's the ability to know when to not sound the alarm, but it's the ability to know when is this meaningful, when do we have something here, and maybe when is this acceptable for whatever reason, this change or deviation from normal is something we should just accept, or is this something that we need to look into a little more.
Is there something that you've put aside, like thrown into the wastebasket in a way, and now you're rethinking? You're like, oh man, I'm going to reach back in there and uncrumple that information because I think it actually is more important than I thought it was.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say waste basket, but a lot of people in this profession come up a strength and conditioning tree, right? And they have foundational strength principles. That was not necessarily the route I went. I was a strength and conditioning intern and helped at, a couple other positions. But in terms of understanding the groundwork when it comes to athlete development, I don't want to say I've thrown it away, but I think that that's something that can get overlooked, in making sure we understand the foundational principles to building athletes and helping them maintain rather than just kind of focusing on the fancy, glowy stuff. Let's make sure that we keep the foundation strong.
You're in regards to strength conditioning, or are there other fundamentals of of this that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think I guess we'll go with I'll go down the sports science route, but from a collecting data standpoint, right, and utilizing data, I think that there's always going to be super specific and granular ways of maybe testing potential isolated areas on an athlete or things of that nature, in which I think do prove the point, right? They do have purpose, but just making sure that at the foundational level, like we talked about fatigue monitoring, we talk about external loading, these kind of different parameters of sports science when it comes to the team population, making sure that all those boxes continue to be checked at a high level and do the little things really well, I think will push you a lot further than maybe a hypothetical new test we're going to throw out there or changes to the process.
Are there other things that you feel are somewhat overlooked because are so many bells and whistles these days, so much flashy stuff?
I don't know. I wouldn't say necessarily like either anywhere that I've been a part of would overlook it, but I think that we can just, as technology advances, right, there's always going to be a new technology, there's going to be a new way to collect data. um, it's making sure that we don't get too not dependent or more so this is kind of as a profession in a whole. I don't want to get too far away from remembering the kind of athlete in itself and the athlete maturation, right, as a whole, in all the different departments or philosophies that circle around that athlete, making sure that sports science and certain really specific modalities don't take too much of that time.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. Okay, you just walked in to the most incredible library that you've ever set foot into, and there's different subjects. Where are your eyes being drawn toward? And I don't mean particular books in themselves, but what subject matter within your realm are you intrigued by that you want to explore and follow down a path?
Let's I would probably go into the biomechanic world, right? In the understanding not necessarily just output metrics and performance from a sports science standpoint, but more so the strategy and specifically like movement strategies, compensation patterns, and how those potential deviations from normal can not necessarily, I don't want to say predict injury because nobody wants to go into that world, but being able to objectify changes in strategy and not just necessarily changes in performance output metrics. So understanding like biomechanics a little bit more would probably be the row I'd walk down.
Right on. Okay, the holidays are fast approaching. You know, we've got Christmas basically a month away. In the world of Cole Gardner, sports scientists, what are you asking Santa for Christmas? If you could ask him for anything in your realm, what would be on your Christmas list?
Let's I'll go with an intangible and just more wins, right? Like
Oh,
again,
that's a low hanging fruit.
that is a low hanging fruit. I would go there. Personally, I'm probably going down the route of getting a new smartwatch, so maybe an Apple Watch or something along those lines. Um, but no, a vacation, time with family. I think in this world, like we spend so much time, we're separated from our families and girlfriends, boyfriends, loved ones, right? Like these are people that we just kind of want to spend more time around. So I'd say if Santa was to bring anything this year, hopefully it's a vacation with family members and my girlfriend and the people that I love and care about.
Right on. But so hopefully that'll be under your tree. I'm sure you'll find some time with that. So what is your work schedule like? So for the aspiring sports scientists out there, give an understanding. Just maybe this is a final question here, but what does your week look like? Do you work 7 days a week?
Yeah, most in season, yeah, most of it, most weeks are once training camp kicks off, it's pretty much every day. Depending on where the role is, some sports scientists do or don't travel with the team. The way I'm situated, I'm not a part of the travel team, and so I'm often staying in well, I'm always staying in Houston. But during the regular season, if with my roles kind of focusing in rehab, if we don't have, God willing, we don't have rehab athletes and anybody coming back from injuries, if the team were to travel, I would probably be off that day. So there is usually like an interspersed off day, but once training camp starts in July, it's pretty much every day, whether it's in the building or whether it's working from, as sports scientists, if we have our computer, we can be doing something, right? So it's pretty much every day in season. Off season is you're working Monday through Friday, in at a reduced hours. And I'll say it again, but we have fantastic staff here in leadership group that really takes care of us as professionals in terms of getting out of the building and getting personal time outside of the season. So I can't speak for everywhere, but I'm really grateful in the position here and the people that allow us to continue education and not necessarily be in the building every day outside of the regular season weeks. But it's definitely a lot, but you love it, so you get lost in it, you enjoy it.
Yeah, it's not work if you have passion
Right.
toward it. It may
Yeah.
not even be a job. Okay, I do have one last question, Cole, if you don't mind, maybe
Hmm.
two. Uh,
For sure.
Percentage wise, how much time is spent in the office mining data, and how much is spent with touch points on the athletes and coaches, either in the weight room or on the field?
Yeah. So I think again, I'll speak unique to my situation here with our group, right? But um, to Tyler's credit, who has joined our staff earlier this year, his ability to have data collected and flowing through, I think it further allows Mark and I to, be on the floor and have athlete interactions, whether it's me kind of in the rehab space, because we kind of have like a siloed space that operates on its own. Um, I would I would look to push probably 60% of the time on the floor or on the field or out at practice or somewhere with athlete interaction, probably 30 or 40% of the time computer work, mining or analyzing data and transcribing reports, that kind of stuff, at the computer.
Right on. Final question here. People want to get more information about Cole Gardner. Obviously, I'll put a LinkedIn for your profile, but do you do any social media like Instagram or Snapchat, Twitter, X, whatever?
Definitely LinkedIn is probably the best. I do have an Instagram, as well. It's Cole Gardner 3, but I'm not necessarily publishing any kind of sports science education there yet. I hopefully one day I want to push down that route, but definitely LinkedIn, or email, which I can give to you as well. We can put it in there, but or however that works. But yeah.
Right on. And do you guys have interns for sports science department there?
We don't usually have interns, unfortunately. I have been asked that before. We don't here, but I do know that I would challenge whoever anybody that's interested in getting into the space. Try your local college football team or wherever you go to school, right? Like or whatever sport. I won't go down a rabbit hole, but I think that there's necessity for sports science and somewhat of those abilities in every sport, no matter what it is, from golf, soccer, lacrosse, field hockey, whatever you want to name. I think that there's opportunity there, and that if you show willingness and interest to get into sport and help athletes better themselves, I think you'll have a tough time not finding a position.
Right on. Cole, I can't thank you enough, man. This has been a really informative conversation. I knew it was going to be. I've been looking forward to our conversation for several weeks now, and you didn't let me down. So thank you so much.
Oh, it was fantastic. Thank you for having me on.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. I want to thank Cole and the Houston Texans organization for allowing this podcast to take place. Remember, you can go online to setantacollege.com, check out all the Masters of Science programs they have to offer and more, setantacollege.com. And head over to my website if you're interested in continuing education, if you're part of the NSCA, the BOC, American Physical Therapy Association, or more, rockysnyder.com. And until then, just go make it a great week. We'll see you next week with another amazing pro. Take care.